Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good evening. Welcome to our book launch for Nashim Mesolelot, Lesbian Women and Halacha, Teshuva with responses. Our very own Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Jeffrey Fox. Before we officially begin, of course, I want to just mention all of our family and friends in Israel. Maharat has many students, around 30 alumni and students in Israel now, and we're thinking about them and their families, and just that everybody's on edge, and we hope that there will be resolution and momentum forward as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Maharat has always prided ourselves as a place that values Masora and Halacha, while at the same time seeking to be part of creating a vibrant and relevant 21st century community. And so it is no surprise that Rabbi Fox's scholarship and questions have brought us together tonight. The exploration began in around 2019 with a convening in partnership with the Herbert D. Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, where we came together with Maharat alumni, students, academic scholars, rabbis, and women who were passionate about moving the needle on gay women's place in Orthodox community forward. Rabbi Fox taught Makorot, he presented ideas, listened to feedback, honed his language, and over the next 4 years wrote this response. If you haven't already read it, you'll see that Rabbi Fox compiles rabbinic and modern sources, then interprets and frames the conversation of how rabbinic sources understood gay women, Nashim Mesolelot, in our Torah, in our tradition. The Teshuva is meant to be an open communal conversation, and it was important to us that we engaged with and heard from others, and are grateful for many of the respondents in the book as well. We're also grateful to Rabbi Aaron Lee Smokler, who helped us with our editing process, and Dr. Gillian Steinberg. I'm not sure if they're online. I just wanted to say thank you to them as well. And of course, Rachel Zopron, who's upstairs, Maharat's Director of Alumni and Community Engagement, for helping us put this event together, as well as the rest of the Maharat staff. I want to personally thank Rabbi Fox for writing this tshuva, and I know he did so because he cannot operate in a world that ignores a large swath of our community. You intuitively understand that people seek to live an integrated life. I also wanted to thank the women who inspired this project, and thank you for your guidance, your patience, your leadership in bringing about this moment and this article and helping it come to fruition. In thinking about this evening, it was important for us to bring this book to life through continued conversation. And so we're thrilled to hear from our 3 panelists. We're going to hear from Miryam Kabakov, a national leader who has worked for more than 3 decades on the inclusion of LGBTQ+ individuals in the Orthodox world. Miryam, of course, is the executive director and co-founder of Eshel, a national organization that supports LGBTQ+ Orthodox individuals and their families. And Miryam is also one of the respondents in the book, so make sure to read her thoughts there as well. And we will hear from Sara Singer, who joined the Eshel team in 2022 as Director of Marketing and Communications. She had previously worked with Eshel on the launch of the high school pledge and as a leader of the Chicago LGBTQ support group. And most importantly, she's a second-year student at Maharat. And of course, we will hear directly from Rabbi Jeff. Each of the panelists will speak for 15 minutes, but 15 minutes each. And then we'll open up for questions. The way we're going to do questions is I am going to pass around some cards. Feel free to write your thoughts and comments. I will gather cards for those online on Zoom. Rabbi Liz is at our computer here and will gather your questions. So please feel free to write them in the chat, and she will be in charge of bringing the questions forward. So without further ado, we're going to turn over to Miryam. Welcome. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It is so nice to be here again. The last time I think I was in this Beit Midrash, Eshel was doing a Yomi Yun with the Maharat students, and it's great. And that now they're out in the world doing wonderful things. So it's just such an honor to be here with you all. So thank you, Rabbi Jeff Fox and the Maharat community for including me today and for being so invested in the efforts to make Orthodox communities LGBTQ embracing in every way. So I'm here to tell a few stories. One is my own personal journey that led me to be here tonight and in celebrating this book and this Teshuva. The other is how this journey led me to do the work I do with Eshel, from the personal to the professional and then back again. So Eshel began the same year in 2011 that an anthology I edited called Keep Your Wives Away from Them, Orthodox Women, Unorthodox Desires was published. This book was a collection of essays by lesbian, both queer women who were Orthodox or formerly Orthodox. The anthology was the first of its kind and shed new light on the experience of queer women in religious Jewish communities. But for me, the anthology was a tribute to the communities of women I had discovered on my journey of coming out and being Orthodox. It was an opportunity to share with readers what had been happening out of their sight for a long time. It was also my effort in getting the stories of hidden lives out in the open. Through the telling of their stories, LGBTQ Orthodox women have been able to see each other in these pages. Growing up in Orthodox community, day schools and shuls, coming out after Ramaz and Stern College, and on a visit to Jerusalem one summer, I finally met my people and was introduced to a hidden group called the Orthodox of Jerusalem. I entered a Jerusalem apartment. Tell me if you've heard this story before. I've told it like 3,000 times. No? Amazing! I found a new audience. I entered a Jerusalem apartment. I only had an address. And when I came into this dimly lit room with candles and great, things on the walls, colorful, whatever on the walls, I saw sitting before me through the dark. I was peering and I saw this woman who looked really familiar. It turns out that she was the woman who interviewed me to get into Stern College. And I knew I was on to a very important discovery at that moment in Hidden Lives. Which eventually, and by the way, I said to her, "What are you doing here?" She was like, "The same thing you're doing here." I ended up staying in Jerusalem for 2 years and developing connections with the women that I had met. And I want to acknowledge my dear friend who has passed away recently, Susan Moser, Zechron Bracha, who was an incredible builder of community. And she was like the center point. She was a very vivacious, wonderful human. And she brought us all together. And when I came back 2 years later to New York, I said to myself, and a few other people said to me, well, if you had that experience in Jerusalem, I bet you can find that experience here in New York. So while I was in graduate school for social work at Yeshiva University, once again, I started the group called the Orthodox of New York. And a few of us are still here. There's Elaine. Anyone else? Okay.
Right.
Don't mean to try to out you. If this group was in Jerusalem, surely it was not just in New York, but also in other places I had lived or around the globe. Who knew? So we tried to find other groups of women in Jerusalem and succeeded when we put ads in the papers that reached the Haredi communities. Imagine trying to do that in Yiddish. It was kind of crazy. And we did find a few other hidden communities, one in Bnei Brak, and that was a really wonderful discovery for myself, and I can share with you after if you're interested to hear more. In this group, this was where I first encountered these texts that Rabbi Fox has written about, both in Jerusalem and later with the group in New York. In fact, we devoted an entire Tikkun Leil Shavuot, just to these texts, and nobody fell asleep. Delving into these texts was very meta. Here we were, a group of women under the radar in our Orthodox communities, reading about the Rambam, discussing the women in his community who were also mostly under the radar and who were drawing in people's wives to have relationships with them. You can read about this, in fact, hidden group of women studying these texts about another underground group of women during the time of the Rambam in Elaine Chapnick's essay, raise your hand, Women Known for These Acts Through the Rabbinic Lens, a Study of Hilchot Lesbian. It's okay if people come up to you later.
So yes, of course, I have the book
I have your book with me and my article.
Oh, great. We're here to promote Rabbi Fox.
I'll sign mine if you sign yours.
So we finally saw ourselves in these texts, but more than that, this discovery affirmed my understanding that any group of Orthodox lesbians had to be underground at that time or until that time in order to flourish. Moreover, it affirmed the power of connecting with text, both halachic and otherwise, and seeing your own life experience mirrored there. In New York in the 1990s, there were many groups germinating, such as JAGL, Jewish Activist Gays and Lesbians, GLIDSA, Gay and Lesbian Yeshiva Day School Olamai, is a mouthful, and JQI, Jewish Queer Youth, which is still around, in addition to this Orthodox group. There was crossover in these groups of people from conservative and Orthodox backgrounds. Students at JTS, which at that time had a ban on gay, lesbian, and trans students, were actively trying to change JTS's policies. We all worked together, Orthodox and conservative queer people, because the Orthodox queer story was very similar to the conservative queer story. The institutions of both movements were inhospitable to us, and the same fears were there. And it wasn't until 2006 that the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the conservative movement voted to allow ordination of LGBTQ clergy. We had found each other, all interested in working on inclusion spaces that we grew up in, but could no longer participate fully as ourselves. Amongst them were many of the closeted rabbinical students at JTS, working for their own liberation and that of others, while trying to get to ordination before being outed. We all knew who they were, and we knew how terrified they were of their dreams being destroyed, of putting a halt to their rabbinic careers and throwing away all those years of work. And one of them, as many of you know, is Rabbi B'nai Lappi, who started Sfara, which is like an incredible gift, in my opinion, to the Jewish people. And that would have all ended had she been outed at the time. A little more than a decade after JOFA was founded in 1997, I submitted a session I wanted to give on lesbianism and Orthodoxy at the 2001 JOFA conference. To my surprise, JOFA agreed that I could speak. JOFA took a big risk, in my opinion, to have someone address this topic. But by doing so, JOFA helped gay Orthodox women find our voices above board. And the room was packed. It was attended not only by women who identified as gay, but by other women who connected their feelings of marginalization in Orthodoxy to the struggle faced by queer women. 2001 was the same year that Trembling Before God, the film, was released. The filmmaker, Sandy Jabowski, came into our LGBTQ Orthodox community and lifted out some very sad stories. It wasn't really reflective of the queer joy many of us had found when we found each other, but it pulled on the heartstrings of Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews alike, and it started a much more public conversation. So we have an incredible debt of gratitude to Sandy. Fast forward to 2011, which was an important year for queer Jews and for queer Americans. The first openly gay rabbi of the conservative movement, Rabbi Rachel Isaacs, received her ordination. It was a major step in the right direction for the queer traditional community. That's how we saw it. That same year, 2011, was also the year that New York and DC enacted legislation legalizing same-sex marriage. So there was a lot going on at the time. And also in 2011, Eshel was born. Now it was gay Orthodoxy's turn to come out from under and establish ourselves as a legitimate voice within the Jewish and Orthodox community. All the leaders of the Orthodox LGBTQ communities that had existed for years under the radar of the Jewish community, the ones that I had mentioned, were all on Eshel's founding board. From GLIDSA to JQI to the Orthodox to the Closeted Men's Group, and also to our past board chair's group, Shlomo Ashkenazi has been running a Closeted Men's Group now in its 40th year out of his living room. They were all there from the very beginning of Eshel. Our mission to make Orthodoxy LGBTQ inclusive. Its time had come. The informal but painstaking organizing we had all been involved in paid off. Eshel became a central address for LGBTQ Orthodox support and advocacy. Eshel is a public entity like any nonprofit, as some of my staff people here know. Asking people to show up to support us, not just financially, but in every other way. One of our first projects was to create a speakers bureau. We trained speakers to go into Orthodox communities to share what it was like to grow up and come out as gay. We knew the power of personal stories to change minds and that would eventually change policies. But surprise, guess what? Very few Orthodox communities were actually asking us to send them our trained speakers. And when they did, they got into big trouble by their VAD, local VAD, or whatever rabbinical governing board. And when they did, they did have backlash. There were some really intense stories about that, and it threatened their existence. So a lot of them retreated and stopped asking us to speak. So we knew we had to take several giant steps back. We realized we needed to create awareness of a need before communities would be ready to hear these stories. We needed to tell our stories, but not by entering Orthodox spaces directly. Living room conversations, growing allied communities became our focus. It surprised us, however, that so many stray people showed up in these places. And it was a wonderful surprise, including some religious leaders, rabbis, learning about their own community and how people were in it who felt like they didn't belong. We also went inward. We shored up our own community internally by creating a unique and somewhat utopian place where the trifecta of Orthodoxy, LGBTQ, and community could exist together. For many people, it is and was a kind of Shangri-La. Whatever you had that was good about growing up in Orthodoxy, plus you could feel like you fully belonged and be who you are. This is through our national retreats and our gatherings, and one is coming up, advertisement on MLK weekend, and all of you who think you belong there, you're invited. Okay. Then we started to add support networks across the United States. In 2013, we began offering support also to Orthodox parents. And we started with a monthly phone call, which turned into a weekend gathering, which became a regular annual event and still is, and more Zoom support groups, many of whom have also found a new kind of Orthodox community that embraced their entire family. It was a place where it is a place where they don't need to hide their LGBTQ child when they share about their children. Bless you. Eshel launched its Welcoming Shuls project in 2015 to quietly identify and match welcoming Orthodox and traditional synagogues, rabbis and communities with LGBTQ Jews wishing to participate in community and synagogue life. Still working the back channels, in 2016, we launched the High School Pledge Project. This is where Sara came into our lives. Thank you, Sara. Where Yeshiva Day School alums sent 30-second messages to their schools asking to take a pledge of inclusion. This got the attention of many Orthodox yeshivot, even though a lot of them didn't tell us that. And we found out that one example of this was that a cluster of schools, yeshivot in New Jersey, came together. They all took seriously under consideration and adopted some inclusion policies under the guidance of their community rabbi that they all spoke to. So we've come a long way, but there are still some vital things that are missing. And this is where we are going, and this is where Maharat can play a vital role. Thank you, Maharat, for being in our lives. So we are LGBTQ Orthodox folks still all DIYing more or less our Orthodox lives, with the exception of some helpers, and some of them are here tonight. Eshel has helped create spaces where LGBTQ Orthodox people can thrive, can find acceptance, can talk to their rabbi without hiding, and can send their kids to Jewish day schools. But what is missing is deep and substantive rabbinic guidance. Don't get me wrong, being under the halachic radar can be a little liberating at times. And DIYing it is incredibly empowering as it allows us to own our own orthodoxy. We would like rabbinic guidance to honor this fact. And for this, we need queer Orthodox rabbis. Hooray for all you Maharats out there who are filling that bill. However, as we mature as a community, we do not want our rabbis to see us as peripheral or second-class members of halachic communities. No, we do not want to be abandoned. We want our rabbis to help us live our lives halachically, which means holding us to the same standards as other Jews. It means that the hard but necessary and ultimately life-giving work of taking the heteronormativity out of halacha. We want leaders to take us seriously enough so that they can figure out how to create guidelines and rules by which we can live as Orthodox Jews, applying what we know. The questions I was asking when I came out are the things that queer Orthodox people are still asking us. How do I create a commitment or a wedding ceremony? Where do I sit in shul? Does Nida have relevance for me? In other words, do all the halachot that applied to me before I came out still apply? And if not, what do I do now? Am I still free-falling? We need concrete guidelines and halachot. We need you as rabbis to teach educators that the way they speak about same-sex relationships or being LGBTQ in Orthodox day schools in regard to text and halacha can be damaging to a student in their classroom. When they stand by while a child is being teased or bullied, this damages someone's soul and connection to their Yiddishkeit. Parents call Eshel to ask where their child will be safe. But without the full accountability from educators at the top, without the rabbis fully committed to their gay and trans kids' belonging, we can't really tell them. This has been the most frustrating thing for us and for the families we work with. So Rabbi Jeff asked me to talk about what was and what is and where we're going. So I'll say in closing that in certain areas, what was missing for me is still missing for people, queer Orthodox people. But we have come such a long way, and so therefore we have still so much more to go. We're ready for the next chapter. Eshel just celebrated our Bar Mitzvah. We're grown up, we're becoming adults. And what that chapter looks like is that mainstream Orthodoxy having us belong like we would if we were straight. Allowing Orthodoxy in turn to be enhanced by our presence so that we can all acknowledge there's great diversity within our communities. So thank you so much for being here tonight and for listening.
That's good. Is this being recorded? 'Cause-
Yes.
Oh, great.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, for those in the room and those on the Zoom.
Hi.
And hi to my mom, she got on the Zoom, thank you. And hi to my wife who made it. Thank you, Miryam, not only for your words tonight and your written response, but your decades and lifetime of commitment to this community. It means so much to have you here. And to Sarah, who will speak after I'm done, thank you in advance for sharing this evening, for what you bring to this yeshiva, and for being you. Thank you to the leadership of Yeshivat Maharat for understanding the importance of putting these questions front and center in our communal discourse. Particular thank you to Rabbi Sara for believing in this project and for having a clear moral and halachic compass on this issue and on many others. Thank you to Rabbi Aaron for shepherding us along the way, to Rachel for making this evening happen. None of this could be here without you. A special thank you to my family, some of whom are here, for the long history of unusual Shabbat table conversations, as well as your love and support along the way.
Right.
In a few minutes, I'll try to summarize the basic content of the Teshuva. But before I do that, I wanted to share 3 brief introductory remarks. First, it is not lost on me that I am a straight white man with all of the privileges. And I have chosen to write about gay women in halakha. There is an awkwardness there that we need to say out loud. And I pray every day that I can use the skills and gifts that Hashem gave me to help people who want to be close to halakha and to our community. Number 2, we chose to publish the Teshuva with a series of responses, some of which are in support, and some of which are in opposition. It's important for me for everyone to understand that this is part of a living, breathing tradition. Halakha ebbs and flows through machloket, through debate. By situating the publication of the Teshuva as already part of the system, we're trying to model for all of us how a community can guide its members in areas that are extremely sensitive. Number 3, finally, and perhaps most importantly, my goal for this Teshuva is actually quite simple. My hope is that after all the fancy work and all the words and pages that are out on this book, that it will eventually turn into a footnote. What I mean is that this should be seen as the starting point for a series of other questions that are yet to be answered, some of which yet to be asked. I imagine a Teshuva that would open with the following sentence: given that Rabbi Jeffrey has written his Teshuva, now, footnote, we need to articulate a model for what a wedding ceremony, what a commitment ceremony might look like between 2 women. Those tshuva will please God be written by students, graduates of Yeshivat Maharat, amongst other women who are entering the world, Psak Halacha. Okay, on to the content of the tshuva itself. In order to understand what I did in this tshuva, we have to unpack two very particular concepts. The first is Nashim Mesolelot, which is the title of the tshuva. That is a very specific phrase that appears inside the Talmud Bavli in 2 or 3 places, which describes some kind of, and it's not clear exactly what, physical, intimate, sexual behavior between 2 women. Nashim Mesolelot, concept number 1. In addition, a separate concept that exists in the Sifra, an early Midrash Halacha, mentions Maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim, the ways of the people of Egypt, which refers to an idea that there were certain types of marriages that took place in Egypt that are prohibited according to Jewish law. One of those relationships was a woman marrying another woman. The key to my approach is the very simple fact that the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi simply never mentioned the idea of Maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim, these unique set of marriages, including a woman marrying a woman. The Bavli raises a question about 2 women who are Mesolelot, to engage in some kind of physical, intimate behavior, and wonders if maybe that kind of interaction might prohibit the women from subsequently marrying a Kohen. Notice the assumption is that this woman will eventually marry a man. The conclusion of the Gemara is that this really isn't considered to be a kind of technical sexual act. So she's not prohibited from marrying a Kohen, and therefore this isn't, technically speaking, sex or biah. It's just called pritzuta be'alma. It is mere licentiousness. It's important to note that the Bavli could have quoted the notion of Maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim, this notion of one woman marrying another woman, to answer a certain set of questions, but it never did. That simple point animates a fascinating essay by Rav Moshe Feinstein that I refer to in the book. In addition, the fact that the Bavli never quotes Maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim, neither do the Baalei HaTosafot, or the Ramban, or the Rashba, or the Ritva. In commenting on Tosfot, the Aruch LaNer, who is a very significant later Achron, explains the case of Nashim Mesolelot. Why would the Gemara have even thought that 2 women engaging in sexual intimacy should potentially in any way be prohibited from marrying a Kohen? Says the Aruch LaNer, because in fact, one of those women was already married to a man. And what they're describing is not simply 2 women together, but one woman is cheating on her husband. And that changes the ethical and perhaps halachic valence of that interaction. And nevertheless, she's still not prohibited subsequently to marry a Kohen. But the Aruch LaNer is describing a very specific kind of case. My very straightforward and I think simple argument is as follows. The contemporary reality of 2 women falling in love and choosing to live in a committed monogamous relationship is simply not in any way, shape, or form like the case of a woman married to a man who's stepping out on her husband with another woman. That kind of behavior is licentious, it's pritzut, and it shouldn't be done. When 2 women fall in love, it's not pritzut, it's just the opposite. It's kedusha. If my claim is so easy, why hasn't everybody else jumped on the bandwagon? So I did something a little bit unfair. I conveniently presented one side of the argument. There's something that I sometimes joke about in yeshiva called the 2-packet theorem. I gave you 1 packet, or a couple of sources from 1 packet. Let me tell you about the other packet, which makes a different argument. The Rambam does something very different. The Rambam brings the Sifra, the Midrash Halacha, that Maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim, back into the flow of Halacha. This is something the Rambam does with some regularity. He seeks to resuscitate the Masorah, the tradition of Eretz Yisrael, and put it center in Halacha. And what he does is claim that Nashim Mesolelot is fundamentally a subset of Maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim, these kinds of weddings. The reason 2 women ought not engage in sexual behavior is fundamentally so they don't get married. The Shulchan Aruch more or less codifies that approach, though there are some differences. Now I want to ask the question with a little bit more understanding. The majority position amongst the Rishonim the medieval authorities isolated Nashim Mesolelot, sexual intimacy between two women, from within the Bavli as a concept not related to marriage. Number one. Number two, there are a few major achronim, including Rav Moshe Feinstein, who understand that case to be about a woman married to a man stepping out with another woman. The Shulchan Aruch paskin like the minority position of the Rambam and sees this prohibition in a more fundamental manner based on the Sifra. So now what? Allow me to now introduce new information to the system that none of the names that I have mentioned of great rabbinic figures could have possibly imagined. Until the end of the 20th century, poskim simply did not understand what it meant to be gay. The unstated assumption of nearly all of these texts is that this woman will remain married to a man because that's their only conceivable option. They don't really understand the physical relationship between two women as anything other than some kind of very physical outlet. The notion that two women would live together in a committed monogamous relationship was not really possible in any public way in the world until the 1980s. You could correct me if I'm wrong. One shouldn't fault the poskim for thinking like the rest of the universe. However, thank God, we live in a time and in a place where we understand the notion of a gay identity. That new information pushes me to feel comfortable saying that we ought to rely on the majority position from the Rishonim, from before the Shulchan Aruch, and celebrate the kedusha of two women who want to live their lives together. I really believe that one of the miracles of the 21st century is that frum, weird people are asking halachic questions. There was a time not too long ago when coming out of the closet meant leaving Jewish religious life, as it sadly still does for many folks. Now, Baruch Hashem, people have found a way to stick around and take on leadership roles, and they're looking for guidance on how to live their lives, al pi Torah. We dare not alienate those folks simply because the Shulchan Aruch paskin like the Rambam against the majority position. It is our job to make room inside the halachic community for women who are expressing kedusha in their relationships. We're standing on the precipice of Slichot, just a week away from Rosh Hashanah. The Orthodox community in general, and the Orthodox rabbinate in particular, has a lot of things about they and we must seek for forgiveness. With the help of Hashem, I pray that we can take this one thing off of that list. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Miryam, for sharing. Thinking about my own role both in this institution and Eshel, I think about all of the things that have changed over the past many years, largely due to the activism that smaller, less organized sort of ad hoc groups had to do, and also how even a lot of those changes have still not necessarily made as much of a difference in the lives, especially of young queer people, as we might have thought that they would or hoped that they would. Yeah. So in my job as the director of communications for Eshel, one of the things that I get to talk about a lot is that there's this external narrative that queerness and orthodoxy are very much at odds, and that like you somehow have to make them come together, which has not at all been the case in my own life experience. For me, they've always been very intimately connected because coming out in high school, that was a time that I felt a deep spiritual need, and one of the times that my connection to my teachers, my spirituality actually had the most growth. And in that period of time, I had maybe more support, more affirmation than any of the generations before me would have dreamed of. I had an openly gay Limmudei Kodesh teacher as a high school student. And I had teachers who were allies, who were willing to learn with me, teachers who were parents of LGBT children themselves. And that still wasn't enough to remove any of the shame or stigma or rejection of the broader Jewish community. So I grew up in the conservative movement, and that was just after LGBT students were starting to be admitted to JTS, was just after the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards had published multiple tshuvot, some of them more affirming than others. And I was lucky enough to have teachers who learned those sources with me, who learned those tshuvot with me in high school. And it was difficult, and it was still a live question of like, where is someone going to go for medical school if they're queer? And what is their life going to look like? And no one had come up with, this is the, official template for a wedding ceremony. And so when I think about what has changed, I was able to come out at a much younger age. I was one of 2 students in my high school class who were openly gay, and the number who've come out since, which is maybe a dozen more at least, I think is a huge indicator of the fact that most people, even with all of those supports in place, all of those things that a generation ago were unimaginable, didn't feel safe being out and speaking to other people about it. So looking at what the Rambam says, even though in your Teshuva, Jeff, you ultimately reject the halachic guidance that he provides, I think there's something that a lot of us appreciate, that he says that there are women who are known for these things. It's, as far as I know, the earliest text that identifies that this is a particular kind of person as opposed to just a behavior, and that Rambam knew some women who seem to have been queer potentially. And I think that's very powerful for a lot of us to say that this is not some new thing, that we're not erased in all of the texts, but that there are texts that see us and that know about us and are trying to speak to our existence. One of the other ways that my queer identity and my Orthodox identity have become very interwoven is that I mostly started to affiliate with primarily Orthodox institutions after meeting my wife, just after I graduated college, and she was more firmly part of the Orthodox community and kind of pulled me along with her. And so that to me also is like challenging a narrative that being queer is something that pulls you away from the Orthodox community. And as we got engaged and got married and tried to figure out how to celebrate those moments of our lives in our community, we had a lot of these needs for DIY halacha. We had somewhat of a lack of rabbinic leadership that were able to answer questions or to support us in those milestones, and even sometimes finding and asking the most supportive rabbinic leaders, they would say, we don't know what to tell you. We don't have an answer for you. And I think at least having someone to go to has really helped a lot of people in the queer community to at least be willing to engage with the halachic system in a way that maybe a generation ago people just felt too hurt and too rejected to continue attempting. And it's also pretty frustrating to go to a rabbi and say, oh, I've never thought of the question that you just asked me, and I have no idea how to begin to answer it. And so that I think is a huge gap that is filled by this tshuva, and hopefully will pave the way for more of those shaylos to be answered. And another thing that I really appreciate about it is that many articles and works that Miryam and I have seen over the years that are supposed to be about the LGBT community are really pretty exclusively written about gay men, and the author may or may not realize that. And so to have an article coming out of Yeshivat Maharat that centers women is not surprising, but it's perhaps refreshing. And I think it also helps to move this discussion around LGBT identity and LGBT sexuality from a concept that those are adult, that only LGBT identity is adult or, not suitable for the Beit Midrash or for schools, and says it's a part of the halachic discourse. Just like any other halachic question, this is something that deserves to be talked about in a Beit Midrash, and that halacha has what to say on it. So hopefully we will keep it in the Beit Midrash and continue to have lots of live questions and new questions coming from people, as with hopefully more inclusion, there's more opportunities and situations that arise that even I couldn't imagine.
Amazing.
really phenomenal. Thank you so much to each of you for sharing your thoughts, your Torah, and your hope for the future.